Pregame.com.
Creighton, Illinois State. It's Friday night, Missouri Valley Conference basketball. Hi, everybody. I'm Scott Spreitzer with Bryan Leonard, and we're talking about the Blue Jays and the Redbirds from Redbird Arena. Now, we're doing this game before the opening lines come out. Bryan and I look for a line of about Creighton 4.5 in that range. It's an interesting week in the Missouri Valley, one of the conferences that I've followed ever since I was a kid from a betting perspective. It's an interesting week because the schedule maker hasn't done these teams a favor, but they're all grouped into the same situation, so there's no favoritism played here. All 10 teams are playing 3 games in 6 days this week in the Missouri Valley. That's never anything to be able to, that's easy to overcome unless you have true quality depth. And Bryan, when I look at these two teams, we've got 2 teams that can go 8-9 players deep and play double digits in minutes played per game. Both teams do that. Creighton, they are what we knew they were. But Illinois State has really been an upstart under Tim Jankovich this year. Most preseason publications at Illinois State slated for a 9th or 10th place finish in this 10-team league, and here they are, just a game out of the top spot.
Well, it's a team that I believe last year they won 12 games.
Exactly.
And 3 years before that they were in the 20s. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because we actually went to see Illinois State play here at a small gym in Vegas a few years ago, and I just loved the way they play. I mean, real pressure defense. One of the teams I'd like to play, always a dangerous underdog. But you take a look at what they've done so far, and you take a look at the teams they played. They got a real low strength of schedule, especially when you consider the teams that Creighton has played. Creighton's gone on the road 6 times this year. They're 5-1 straight up. They beat UAB on the road. Mm-hmm. They beat San Diego State on the road. Right now, a top 22 team, a young team, very, somewhat similar to the players for this Illinois State team, or Illinois State team, and then they go and they blow out Tulsa. And Tulsa's not that great this year, but that's a tough place to play.
Sure.
So they've proven themselves on the road, and actually they won last year at this venue, and that's the first time they've beaten Illinois State here. And I think 5 of the last 6 years Illinois State has won, but it's a totally different Illinois State team this year.
Well, they believe in themselves, and what's different from last year is they score some points when they need to. Last year, Illinois State topped 70 points, or I should say reached 70 points 4 times in their final 29 games. They're averaging about 69 points per game this season. But what's the most interesting about this team is there's so much young blood. I mean, there's no senior night at Redbird Arena this year because they don't have any seniors on the team. A lot of juniors, but there's also 6 newcomers, a lot of underclassmen who are making some noise for Illinois State. And I remember before the season, something that kind of caught my attention from following this conference closely is that Tim Jankovich took his team on a tour of Canada, playing basketball games against Canadian teams before the season began. And I thought, this gives them, I didn't think they're going to be playing this well at this point. But at the same time, I thought it does give them a little bit of a chance to grow and to find some team chemistry with all these young players. There's no superstars. There's no Doug McDermott's for Illinois State. There's a group of about 6 players who average between 7 points and about 13 points per game. Everybody understands the role on this club.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned a couple of points that I always take a look at. One is the preseason trips. Mm-hmm. I go out and get the Blue Ribbon Basketball Yearbook every year. First thing I do is go through, okay, this team took a trip, this team took a trip. And I believe it's 1 out of every 4 years, is it, that you could take a trip?
So, yeah.
And it's such an advantage because you're getting to play, not only do you get to play extra games, you're getting to play, you're going to these countries like Canada, you're playing the national Canadian teams. I mean, these are professional players, real strong players. And you can actually see when you can go on the road and you can play these teams that are actually very good, like when you go to Europe or whatever, and these teams play professionally, and you're able to win them. Let's say you're playing 4 games, and you win 3 of them. Mm-hmm. Now, that's a really good precursor for the rest of the year. And you mentioned the balanced scoring on this team, and I go through and I look at percentage. As opposed to, this guy scores 20 points, gets 9 rebounds, whatever. I look at the percentage of what he does for the team, because every team plays different, fast-paced, slow paces. And they've got 5 guys on this team that make up basically 50% of the scoring, which means it's so balanced they could just bring in the next guy and do the same thing. And that's something I really like about this young team.
And one thing we saw at Creighton the other night when they played Northern Iowa, that was in Omaha. And by the way, I'd much rather be involved with the Creighton Blue Jays backing them with my money away from home. They don't do quite as well for whatever reason this season under Greg McDermott, and they're a little bit too overvalued, I think, at home by the lines maker. And when they go on the road, they don't usually have to lay as much chalk, or they're usually getting a couple of more points than you feel they should from the odds maker because of public perception. And the team almost seems to come together and be more focused away from home instead of in front of those 18,000 J-backers at the beautiful arena that they play in Omaha. But the bottom line is, what they showed me the other night is that they can win against quality Missouri Valley competition, whether it's a 90-80 game or a 63-60 game. They beat Northern Iowa in Omaha by a score of 63-60. And Doug McDermott had an off night scoring-wise. He's averaging 24.5 points per game. He only scored 14. But this team has so many other role players who know what they are supposed to do right now for this team. Echenike was the transfer from Rutgers, the big man in the middle. Not a big point scorer, goes about 6'9", but he's a lane clogger on the defensive end. He knows what he's there to do. They've got Ethan Raggy, who understands his role off the bench, has done a great job. Gibbs is a disher. He'll average 5.5, 6 assists per contest. And you've got Manigat, who's also another great player in the backcourt. But Antoine Young, and everybody right now is talking about Doug McDermott. Antoine Young is the quarterback on the floor for this team. He had 21 the other night. When Northern Iowa double-teamed and clamped down on McDermott, Antoine Young came through again. The guy averages about 12.5 points per game, and he is the key spoke to this entire wheel. Now, they're not going to go a whole season and win 25 games without Doug McDermott, obviously, but they need Antoine Young on the court also. And he can bring that leadership along with McDermott, who's only a sophomore but plays like a veteran, that might throw a wrench into what Illinois State's trying to do.
Yeah, you look at the backcourt, Young and Gibbs, I believe a senior and a junior,
right.
And you compare it with the backcourt of Southern Illinois. They've got a freshman actually leading the team in assists per game. So I love playing teams who are better teams, that are able, veteran teams, are able to go on the road and win in a short number, which I figure this 4.5 is what we've come up with here. And Illinois State's a team that expectations have not been very strong, but once again, they haven't played a lot of very good teams, and you've got a Creighton team that actually went on the road and beat Wichita State.
That's right.
And if we remember, we live in Las Vegas. One of the 2 losses for the Rebels this year was at Wichita State, and granted, it was a bad scheduling spot, but that just tells you how good that home courts are in this conference for quality teams. And for a team like Creighton to be able to go on the road and win there by a margin, I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Well, one of the things I do, and I posted on the forum, is every Monday night I break down the new top 25 and I look for the most overrated team of the week that's in the rankings, the most underrated team, and a team that's outside the top 25 that I feel should be in the top 25. And we had Louisville as the most overrated team in the top 25 a few weeks ago when they were ranked 3rd or 4th in the nation. They've since fallen on a couple of hard losses, including that disaster against Providence. But I'm glad you brought up Wichita State from the Mo Valley, because we were saying this week that we felt that they deserved a 25th or 24th ranking, and they got no votes at all, which means this conference is still flying under the radar. They didn't even get one single vote, which means they weren't in the top 35 or 36. That is a tough place to play. You mentioned the Blue Jays went in there and won that. I went to the game at San Diego State, and San Diego State was up by 14 or 15 points in the first half, and the Blue Jays just never lose sight of what they want to do, and they keep that focus on the road. They came back and won the game outright. I think it was 86-83. But I like Illinois State that they go 6'10", 6'9", 6'7" on the blocks. There's not a lot of Missouri Valley teams that have that kind of size, but it's so young, and I think it's growing pains time this week, Friday night, when they host the Creighton Blue Jays.
Yep, I agree. I think Creighton wins this game by 6 or more, and as we said, we don't know what the line's going to be. We figure it's going to be in the 4.5 range, and as long as I get a 2-point advantage over the line, I'm going to take Creighton in this game. I
love a comment made by Greg McDermott, the coach of the Blue Jays, a few weeks ago. It was like after the 3rd or 4th game, and his kid was leading the nation at the time in scoring, and they talked to him about how much, do you like being in Omaha after you coached at Northern Iowa and then most recently at Iowa State? And he goes, I know I have at least 3 more years of job security. Of course, thinking that Doug McDermott's coming back for 3 more years. But I'm going to say one tip, and I used to get this when we used to do the Stardust line back in the 90s. People would come from out of town and they'd say, I have a 40-hour-a-week job or more, and, what's your advice as far as following teams or conferences, and how do you make money at this if you've got another job? And I'm always like, man, focus on a conference like the Mo Valley or the Horizon League or the A10. Focus on these conferences that don't get talked about every other minute on SportsCenter and things of that nature, and you can find some really nice gyms. And I've been a huge, and I don't mean GYM, I'm talking about GEM, and I've been a huge proponent of the Mo Valley since way back when. I'm talking about Antoine Carr, Aubrey Sherrod, the MTXE for you Wichita State fans, mental toughness, extra effort era. All of that stuff. This is a conference I still follow, still make good money on it. In fact, we went against Creighton when they played against St. Joe's from the A10 earlier this season and got a win there. But I'm with you. I'm on Creighton. I think they win by 6 or more.